So, Shalom Aleichem, everyone. Welcome to the Aliyah day. Hope that you're doing well, being blessed, and hope that you've had a great Thanksgiving. I am glad to be back with you. I am so blessed. Okay. So, welcome back to our program. Today, we'll be talking about Rachel and her idols, which is actually the subject matter of the Aliyah today. Jacob and his family flee Laban, who has been cheating him and using him and abusing him. And he's decided just to get out of town, to go back, to make his way back. He takes his wives and his children, and Rachel ends up stealing her father's, idols, which is going to, really catch up with her in the end, no pun intended. And we're going to be looking at this because I think sometimes in the ancient commentaries, this topic is somewhat glossed over. I'm going to explain that here in just a minute, why that's the case. It's pretty much glossed over. Excuses are made, but I do think that, and I've covered this topic before. There's another Aliyah called Rachel's Idols, and I go over this in greater depth. But I do think it's important to highlight this topic again, because there might be idols that you and I are holding on to because we believe in them. And I want to be talking about that here in just a moment. Speaking of idols, I did a teaching on the book of Acts, another one, the errors of Acts. And for those of you who may not have seen that, maybe you're just now hearing about it. It is on our channel now, Errors in Acts. And I encourage you to take a listen to that teaching, because what I bring out is that there are numerous biblical, historical errors in Acts. There are also some anachronisms. An anachronism is something that's out of the timeline or out of the time period. And then with respect to Acts, there are things that, Acts is allegedly a book that was written in the mid-first century. However, as the scholars point out, it includes things that are from the, later time period in the second century. So it's really, really difficult. I in my experience, it's very challenging to write a work of history about futuristic events. That's always been, I've always found that challenging. When I sit down to write, I'm going to write a letter, and it's going to have to do with historical facts. And I include in that letter futuristic events that have not yet happened. I always find that to be something that's difficult to do. We also talk about in that teaching how, interestingly, the character of Stephen is entirely fictitious. And I talk a little bit about this when I did the teaching on the myth of the stoning of Stephen. But I also put that in there that, the entire Stephen, like, never actually existed, which I find fascinating. But I have another couple of teachings that I wanted to do another one this week, but with the Thanksgiving holiday, it just proved to be not feasible. But I have two other teachings to do on this topic of Acts in general. One is the real Paul, finding the real Paul, because the book of Acts presents a Paul that is fundamentally different than what Paul writes in his own writings. Hey, let me ask you a quick question. This is going to be part of the teaching too, but I just want to throw this out there as kind of a teaser. A biography is a work in which somebody writes about themselves, right? Okay, so you want to sit down and you want to write a book so that when people read it, they know about you, your life, your history, your challenges, your adventures, whatever. That's called a biography, okay? All right? You want to write something about yourself, and so forth and so forth. I'm sorry, that's autobiography. I'm getting these backwards in my head. Sorry. An autobiography. So this is where you write it. You write yourself. You write the information down. That's called an autobiography. My apologies for getting this mixed up. A biography, on the other hand, is when somebody writes a story about you. Maybe they know you, or maybe they've studied you, or whatever. Most biographies are not written by people who actually know the subject personally, but rather have studied the subject. So my question is, of the two, let's suppose you had an autobiography and you had a biography of the same person. However, the autobiography was fundamentally different than the biography. In other words, the two works present a fundamentally different person, a fundamentally different subject. So the question would be, which do you think would be the more authoritative? So if you're trying to define the person, discern the person's personality, their events, their life, who they are, et cetera, would you trust the autobiography more, or would you trust the biography more? That's the question for the table. Let's say good morning as we dive into our discussion today. Good morning to you. Who else? Who is this? Yonina? Okay, Boker Tov. Good morning, Hepzibah. Yochanan and Tirza, Boker Tov. Good morning, Yonina, who is formerly from Georgia. Boker Tov to you. Good morning, Kim Bement and Denise. Isaac, Boker Tov. Good morning, Kara and Greg. Good morning, Jacqueline. The Rebbitzin. There's the butterfly. Good morning, Lantern Signals. Good morning to Cintario. Your mother hates the countdown. Well, I'm so sorry to hear that. That hurts my feelings. Good morning, Grace. Good morning to Zachary Boker Tov. I've caught that now, so Davis is your middle name. Good morning, Roy. Good morning, who else? Seth Boker Tov. Good morning to Kayla and Rob and Chris Lopez and Nellie Grace and Sonia. I don't know why I skipped a whole bunch of it for some reason. Good morning, Heather Wilson, Boker Tov. Good morning, Chad and Micaiah. And who else do we have? Thank you, Seth, for the thumbs up on the Acts teachings. Appreciate that very much. Good morning, Cactus Annie. Shoshana Brunner, Boker Tov to you. Good morning, Yitzhak. Good morning, Marcus. Good morning, Boker Tov to Coffee Porch Ponderer. Good morning, Jubilee. Good morning, Edith. Boker Tov to you. Glad you're here. Yes, welcome aboard. So the autobiography would be the more authoritative work, that you would have. Baruch HaShem. Yeah. So anyway, I'm enjoyed teaching on Acts. I think it's really important to do those teachings, and it's a blessing. So let's look at the autobiography would be more authoritative. Why? Because it's the person writing about themselves. Biographies are less authoritative because it's a third person writing about the person. So look, I probably know more. I'm just going to throw this out there. I know it's a wild thought, but I probably know more about my history and my upbringing than you do. Now, you might write a biography about me someday, and whoever you are, because I'm just using this as an example. I'm not saying this is something you would actually do, but this is just theoretical. You might study my life or read about me or read my writings or whatever, watch my videos, and then you might write a biography about me someday. Okay, that'd be fine. But if I wrote an autobiography, then probably what I wrote would be more accurate than what you wrote. Not because you're anything other than not me. So when we get into the book of Acts, we're going to find that the the biography, which is what Acts really is, it's a biography of Paul, is fundamentally different than his own autobiography. And we're going to decide which one we're going to trust. Kara, but do we trust the autobiographer? You've thrown a wrench into the proverbial machine, Kara. Dun, da, da, da. All right, so getting back to our discussion at hand with Rachel and her idols, we have here in the book of Genesis, beginning in chapter 31 and verse 19, it says Laban had gone to shear his sheep, or excuse me, verse 17. My apologies. It starts in verse 17. So as we mentioned, Jacob has decided to skip town, get out of town, hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. So he's taking his kids and his wives, and he's out of town. And he says, Jacob arose and lifted his children and his wives onto the Gamalim, otherwise known as camels. He led away all his livestock and all the wealth which he had amassed. So he went to Bank of America, cashed out, and he's out of town. It says his purchased property which he had amassed in Padan Aram to go to his father Isaac to the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole the teraphim that belonged to her father. Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he was fleeing. Thus he fled with all he had. He arose and crossed the river and set his direction towards Mount Gilead. It was told to Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, so he took his kinsman with him and pursued him at a distance of 7 days, catching up with him at Mount Gilead. But God had come to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said, beware lest you speak with Jacob, either good or bad. Now, by the way, remember that Laban is a master sorcerer. You should know this, okay? He's an idolater, to be sure, yes. And he's a master, sorcerer. So it says Laban overtook Jacob. Jacob had pitched his tent on the mountain, while Laban had stationed his kinsmen on Mount Gilead. Laban said to Jacob, what have you done that you have deceived me and led my daughters away like captives of the sword? As some people say, the sword. Why have you fled so stealthily and cheated me? Nor did you tell me, for I would have sent you off with gladness, with song, with timbrel, and with lyre. Yeah, right. And you did not even allow me to kiss my sons and daughters. Now you have acted foolishly. It is in my power to do you all harm, but the God of your father addressed me last night, saying, beware of speaking with Jacob, either good or bad. Now you have left because you longed greatly for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods? So here we come to a very important crux of the situation. Laban is pointing out all these things. This is total gaslighting. Lying. Okay. But then he asks a very important question at the end of this gaslighting. You want to go to your father's house. You long to go back to, what is you believe to be the Holy Land. But why did you steal my gods? And really, this is a really, really good question. And I think it's going to come back to the idea that we've been talking about this entire week, really, and even last week. And that is really the difference between Leah and Rachel. Rachel had some issues, and the Torah wants to take pains, to bring these out. She had some issues. And, one of those issues is that is evidently has to do with these gods, these idols that she steals. Now we're going to read some insights here and talk about why, the why. What do the ancients, what do the commentaries say with respect to why Rachel took the idols? Because Rachel is considered a Zadika. She is obviously a matriarch. And so a lot of the commentaries try to reconcile why she would steal idols. The problem is that with the explanations, which some of which may be plausible, there are in fact problems. And I've brought this out before, as I said in other teachings. I'm going to repeat myself on a few things today. But I want us to think about this because we need to have an eyes wide open view. So, by the way, this reminds me of something, because I mentioned that Rachel is considered a Zadika. Zakin Yagal and I were having a brief conversation yesterday, and we're talking about this point that a lot of Christians make this mistake because it comes from the fallacy of Christian teaching. And you might have this same thought process. Some of you who are watching are presently Christians, and you're, as I've said so many times, you're here because you're trying to make sense of things. Others of you, however, have left Christianity. However, those same Christian tapes kind of roll around in your head. So what do I mean by that? Well, we were having this conversation of, in the Christian mind, once you violate the law of Moses, you're a sinner. Okay. And look, even in the letter of James, there's a statement that's made that says, if you've broken one law, you've broken the entire law. Now, I understand what James is kind of getting at there, what Yaakov is getting at, because, the law of God is very often spoken about in the scriptures, in the Hebrew scriptures, in the singular. I present you today this mitzvah. Okay. Well, he's not talking about a specific commandment. He's talking about the commandments as a whole, but it's used in a singular form to indicate that the entire commandment is one unit. Okay. So if you look at that in kind of an analogy, if you violate one law, you've broken all of them. Now, what I think that Yaakov was getting at was, because remember, Yaakov's letter is really, and scholars believe this, and so did Martin Luther believe this, okay, that Yaakov's letter really is a refutation of Paul's false gospel. He's trying to correct the record and basically help people get away from the lies of Paul. And so Paul was teaching, as an example, that you only need to keep certain aspects of the law, but others you can throw away. As an example, you don't have to keep circumcision. And James is making the point that no, it's one unit. So if you violate one part of it, as an example, you don't get circumcised, then you violated the whole thing. That was his point, okay? But Christians have latched onto that, and they've said, well, if you violate one law, you're guilty of violating all of it. Well, they've kind of taken Yaakov's analogy and kind of misapplied it, because here's the reality. That's simply not true. Like on the Peshat level, on the base level, there is nowhere, anywhere in the scriptures that even remotely suggests that if we break one law, a particular law, that we're guilty of breaking all the law. That's actually not true. And the human is never held accountable. Like, well, in other words, if you commit a sin of theft, you're not also prosecuted for murder. Because remember, the law is both in heaven and here, meaning that the law is a real thing. In other words, it's not just spiritual, So if you violate the law of theft, you're taken to court and you're prosecuted for that. Well, when you go to court, they don't prosecute you for all the other laws. So I'm just trying to say that fundamentally, it is not true that if you break one law, you're guilty of breaking them all. That's just not true. The scripture does not say that ever anywhere. In fact, let me prove it to you. Find me the verse that says it, not the letter. Don't give me a letter. Give me a scripture verse that says it from the Hebrew scriptures or from the Gospels, for that matter. Where is it in the Tanakh? Prove me wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll admit it. I have no problem with that. Okay. If you show me a verse, I go, wow, golly, I guess I overlooked that. I didn't realize that was there. That's fine. I'll do that all day long. But it's not there. Does that mean that Yaakov was lying? No, he was making a broader point, but he wasn't being literal. Okay, that's my point I'm trying to make. Okay, does that make sense? Please let me know if it makes sense, what I'm trying to say. Now, going back to the idea of being a Zadika or a Zadik. So in the Christian world, if you break the law, if you commit an offense, you're a sinner for all time. Well, is that true in the real world? So how many of you, don't raise your hand, but how many of you have ever gotten a speeding ticket? Okay. Does that mean that you're a criminal? Or any other crime for that matter? Usually if you commit a criminal offense, a lot of people have, and you pay your debt, whatever that means. Whether it's a fine or probation or you went to prison or whatever it is or whatever the situation. Are you forever like a criminal? No, of course not. On the spiritual level, it's even more profound. What am I talking about here? Well, what I mean is that in Judaism, if you commit a sin, and you subsequently make teshuvah, you follow the law, what it says about making teshuvah, then you're no longer considered a sinner. And look, I think this is an important topic. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I think it is. You Christians out there, you've been taught something that's duplicitous. It speaks of both sides of its mouth, okay? On the one hand, you've been taught that once you break the law, you're a sinner. On the other hand, you're taught that God's forgiveness makes all things clean and turns the red as white as snow and washes away your sin. Well, which is it? You see what I mean? In other words, a lot of people don't believe because again, these old Christian tapes in your head, you don't believe that you can be a righteous person. Because Christianity teaches that in order to be righteous, you have to be divine. You have to be absolutely perfect. And that's a lie. That is a lie, and it's not scriptural. Judaism, otherwise known as biblical theology, teaches that somebody can be righteous even if they're not perfect. Why? Or how? Because they make teshuvah. So yes, this is why King David can say, as an example, in Psalm 18, that he was a righteous person who followed God's laws perfectly. Well, did David, was he perfect? Did he ever make a mistake? Well, sure he did. You know he wasn't perfect, but yet the scripture testifies that he was righteous, perfectly righteous. Why? Or I keep saying why, but how? Because he made teshuvah. Okay, this brings us back to our conversation about Rachel. You might say, well, Rabbi, if what you're talking about today and what you've talked about in the past, then why is she a matriarch? Well, she is a matriarch because there is believed to be a level of teshuvah in her life. Plus, she's also the wife of Jacob, so there's that. But it doesn't preclude us from exploring the deep fallacy that she had. Look, there's a reason why Rachel is not buried in Machpelah. Okay? There's a reason why she's in a tomb all by herself. And I believe, in my opinion, as you look at this is the big reason. She had an idol problem. Now, let me explain what this means, okay? It says she hid the idols in her gamal's saddlebag. A gamal is a camel. So I'm just going to paraphrase the end because I want to get to an insight here. So Laban says, why did you steal my gods? And then Laban spoke up and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. Yet to my daughters, what could I do to them to this day, or to the children who they have borne? So now come, let us make a covenant, and I, you, and he shall be a witness between me and you. So Jacob goes on to take him to task, okay, and basically tell him how the cow ate the cabbage. But he also says to Laban, look, I didn't steal your gods. In fact, if you find your gods here, do a search. If you find them, whoever has them will die. Well, he does the search. He goes into Rachel's tent. Rachel says that, she's in her menstrual time and she can't rise up. But she's actually sitting on the saddlebags that have the idols in there. And so she basically deceives her father into so he won't look in the saddlebags and find the idols. Subsequently, she's going to die in childbirth. Why? And the sages point this out. Because that curse befell her. Okay? She ended up dying in childbirth when she had Benjamin. So now we have now it brings us to this issue of the idols themselves. So I want to begin here with Rabbeinu Bachya's commentary. It says Rachel stole the teraphim. Okay, so he's going to explain kind of what are the teraphim. Now, let me pause here for just a minute and say something really quickly. As we go through this, I want you to kind of ask yourself the question. What is it? What idols might I be holding on to? What idolatrous beliefs? What idolatrous ideas might I have in my possession? Now, some people are listening to this, that you might be keeping Christmas still, or some other Christmas or Halloween or Easter. Or at least you might hold on to the ideas that those have some type of value. Okay. And I just want to say that, that's not the case. I was just looking here, kind of looking at the insight. I was trying to find a particular insight. It says here that Laban was looking for, here it is. Laban was looking for the idols, right? Because Chad had mentioned this, and it's very interesting. It says, Jacob answered, said Laban, because I was afraid, for I thought perhaps you might steal your daughters from me. With whomever you find your gods, you should not live. In the presence of your kinsmen, assert for yourself and take it back. So as Laban came to Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and tent of the two maidservants, but he found nothing. When he had left Leah's tent, he came into Rachel's tent. It says, now Rachel had the teraphim, but put them into the camel's paddle sack and sat on them. Laban rummaged through the whole tent, but found nothing. She said to her father, let my Lord be angered. I cannot rise up before you, for the way of women is upon me. Thus he searched, but did not find the teraphim. Okay. The teraphim. And then that's when Jacob became angry and started to, get mad at him. I wanted to look at something real quick. Excuse me for moving books around everywhere, but I was looking for a particular diagram. I don't know if I saw it in here or where I saw that about the tent. Yeah, because Chad is right. It's interesting because the scripture kind of indicates, and it's a good catch, Chad, that Rachel's tent is kind of checked twice, because it talks about coming into Jacob's tent, and then he goes into tents of the wives. The problem is there's only 4 tents. Like, Jacob doesn't have a separate tent. Jacob had set up his residence inside of Rachel's tent. So it says that he checked Jacob's tent, and then it says he checked everybody else's tent. Then it says specifically he checked Rachel's tent, which means he basically checked Rachel's tent twice. That's a good catch, Chad. Which kind of is interesting, because what does that mean, or what could you deduce from that? Well, it's probably that Laban knew something about his daughter. If anybody was going to steal the idols, it would be Rachel. Laban seemed to know this. Did Laban know something about Rachel we didn't know? Did Laban know that Rachel still had kind of like a lingering emunah in idolatry? So he searched her tent twice. It's very interesting. But it says here, Ramban speculates that the teraphim were some kind of hourglass or similar instrument with which to measure time. These vessels were employed to glean knowledge about future events. The word itself is derived from Neraphim, where Pharaoh accused the Israelites of pretending to be too weak or to work hard. They called these vessels teraphim, to hint that the power for telling events associated with these instruments was rather on the weak side. So there are others who suggest that these teraphim were like ancestral deities, little gods, little figurines. In any case, they were idols used in sorcery and so forth. So the question, it says here, this is in Rabbeinu Bachya's commentary. The question which concerns us is why Rachel bothered to steal them if they were so unreliable. Okay. Well, it says apparently Rachel stole the teraphim so they could not reveal Yaakov's whereabouts to her father, seeing that Yaakov and family had fled from Padan Aram. The teraphim were Laban's deities. He put a great deal of faith into their ability to reveal to him what he wanted to know. Laban was an expert magician. He himself said, Nakshti, I have consulted oracles, and these oracles had told him that his newfound wealth was due to Yaakov. In fact, the whole country of Haran was well known for its preoccupation with oracles, snake charmers, and all these methods to divine future events. This is already referred to in Isaiah 2:6, where it says, for they are full of magic practices from the east and of soothsaying like the Philistines. Okay. Rabbeinu Hananel writes as follows concerning the subject of the teraphim. He says, Rachel stole the teraphim in order to force her father to become a penitent, seeing he would realize that a God which allows itself to be stolen surely could not be something of substance. How could a God who cannot take care of himself take care of others? Concerning the teraphim, Rabbi Avraham Ibn Ezra writes, I am fairly convinced that these teraphim resembled a human shape in order to enable them to receive celestial powers and input. However, I cannot explain this in further details, as the Torah forbids such conversations. We can conjecture that Ibn Ezra was correct when he considered that David's wife and David's wife and daughter of King Saul, had placed teraphim in David's bed to mislead the king's police in thinking that David himself occupied that bed. Okay. Michal had claimed that her husband was sick and could not present himself at court. This leaves us with the question of how to explain Hosea, that says that the Israelites would go for a long time without either ephod or teraphim. The meaning there seems to be that they would practice no religion, neither the Jewish religion, symbolized by the ephod, which contained the means of the high priest to receive communication from God, nor the teraphim, which was a means to receive such communication from spiritually negative forces or celestial spheres. I've read somewhere else these teraphim that look like little action figures, that they, whenever you consult them, they would actually start speaking, like their mouth would start moving and give you the oracle that way. They were animated. So it says, Rachel's whole purpose in sealing such teraphim, it says here, was to wean her father from the practice of idolatry. After all, God had promised to remove idolatry from the face of the earth, as written in Isaiah 2:18. And as for idols, they shall vanish completely. All right. That all sounds well and good. I understand, as I've said, the reasoning that is laid out. I think that there's another word here. Here's this is from Mam Loez. Rachel stole them so that Laban would not be able to find out where they had gone. Okay. So there are, as I've said, all these different reasons that are given for Rachel to steal the idols. She didn't want her father to be able to find them. That's really the most common reason that is presented. Another reason that's presented here, as I just read, she wanted to wean her father off of idolatry and, prove a point to him or something to that effect. This is a real problem. Because why does Rachel keep them? And by the way, we don't ever read that she got rid of them. I'm not aware of any source or any place in the scripture where it says she got rid of them. Or perhaps it's true that she eventually discarded them, but we don't know that. And here's the problem. Suppose that she did steal them because she didn't want her father to find them, or perhaps she stole them, as it's been suggested, that because she didn't want her father, she wanted her father to become a penitent, to get away from idolatry, which of course, that's all. That sounds good. It sounds good for that excuse. Problem is that even rational? Is that something that, idolaters make their own idols? So if you lose an idol, you just make another one. It's not like, idol's gone, I guess my faith needs to change. But the bigger question is really a simplistic one. And this is where critical thinking really comes into play. If this was the reason that Rachel stole the idols, then why keep them? She could have easily discarded them on the road. She could have thrown them into a ditch or over a precipice or whatever. She could have buried them. For that matter, she could have thrown them into a fire. She could have crushed them. She could have destroyed them. She could have taken a hatchet to them and cut them up into pieces. So the question is, why didn't she do that? Another question is, why did she keep it a secret? Why didn't she tell her husband or any of the other wives, hey, I'm doing this so he can't find us? Why didn't she do that? And then Jacob would have told her, don't do that, or maybe throw them into the fire or whatever, or hey, that's a great idea, wife, throw them off a cliff. Throw them into the pond, throw them into the lake, whatever the case may be. Why hold on to them? Why keep it a secret? And when she hears her husband issue the curse, whoever has them is going to die, that might have been a good time to say, okay, I took them, but here's why I took them. Pop, I just wanted you to know that these idols are nothing, and I didn't want you to use them to find us. And so my bad, I took them. I should have spoken. And that would have been a great time for confession. When your husband has issued this evil decree. Because remember, teshuvah can tear up any evil decree. So why didn't she say something? Why did she lie? Why did she hold on to them? It doesn't make any sense. So in my estimation, when you bring this forward, the idea that she stole them for any other noble purpose, in my view, is kind of no longer probable. Okay. Possible? Yes. Probable? No. I know I've mentioned this recently. It's really important for you as a human being to understand the difference between possible and probable, because people will gaslight you in various different conversations and topics. They will gaslight you into convoluting those two meanings. If something is possible, doesn't mean it's probable. People gaslight you and make you think that because it's possible, it's also probable. That's not necessarily the case. Okay. So why did Rachel keep the idols? Because she believed in them. I think that Rachel probably thought that the idols would come in, would come in handy at some point. The point I'm trying to make here is that there was something about Rachel, and her heart was still connected to idolatry. I think that's fairly obvious. In fact, she gave her life for this. You do realize that Rachel died because of this. Like, this is the reason she died. Even after, okay, even if you could say, well, she didn't want to speak up, but even after Laban left, don't you think that Rachel could have, maybe in a very quiet time with her husband, no one else is around, just the two of them, she could have said, hey, that whole idol thing, this is what I did. And at that point, they could have burned them in the fire. Jacob could have gone to HaShem and asked HaShem to forgive his wife, and all would have been right in the world. But she didn't do that. And the big question that's never answered is, why didn't she do that? What's the reason why she didn't do that? And I believe it's because she held on to him. Now, there was a time where Jacob told everybody to bury their idols. She might have gotten rid of it at that point, but at that point, it's just really too late. It's too late. So the moral of the story here, this is the takeaway for us from the story of Rachel, because it ends up, she dies because of this, is to make sure that we're not gaslighting ourselves. I said, some of us hold on to idolatrous things from time to time. But see, something also idolatrous may be Paul. For a lot of people, Paul is an idol. He's like a security blanket. A lot of people, by the way, let me connect this to Paul. So why is it that people like idolatry so much? You ever thought about that? What is it about idolatry that's so, what's the word? Enticing to the human? Anybody have any answers? Let's just take a second here. Would anybody like to answer this in the class? What do you think? Why do you think that idolatry is so enticing? What do you think the root, if you had to say one thing, the root reason why idolatry is so enticing, what do you think that might be? I know there's a time delay here, so I'm just going to wait for a second, see if anybody, might have an answer. Again, the question on the table is, what fundamentally is the reason why people are so drawn to idolatry? Quick fix, that might be a reason. Idolizing a menu is popular as well. Okay, control, you can call the shots. Yes, I'm going to go, these are all good answers. I'm going to go with Shoshana Burner because that's closest to what I was thinking. That's true, Seth. Self-centered. Nellie Grace, only I have the power. That's true. It really comes down to you get to have the control. You get to call the shots. Idolatry is a free-for-all. See, the dirty little secret of idolatry is that really you're the God. You made the idol. You are the one who determines what the idol wants or doesn't want. That's really the truth. You see, idolatry allows you to do what you want. That's really why people love idolatry, because they can do what they want. They can enjoy whatever sensuality they want to enjoy. Now, sure, idolatrous cults have rules and so forth. That's true. But if you really analyze the rules, really, it's kind of whatever you want to do. You get to call the shots. And this is why Paul is such a powerful idol. Because Paul and his heretical teachings really come down to you get to do whatever you want to do. And this is why, in a lot of idolatrous cults, people just ignore the rules. Well, we're supposed to do this, but we really don't. What does Paul do? He makes all these different rules. People don't follow them. When's the last time you went to church and every woman had her head covered? Would you say that amongst Christians, the majority are single and celibate? Or would you say the majority are married? You see, nobody follows what Paul tells them to do anyway. That's not really the point, is it? What Paul gives them is what every idol gives them, the power to do what they want. And that's what people hate about the law of Moses. They hate the Torah with a passion. Remember, the Torah is God, so they hate the Torah. They hate God. Why? Why do they hate it with a passion so much? Because it gives them rules. That's why when you pass by the idolatrous temples, it has big signs that says, no rules here. No rules, just Jesus. That's what people love. That's what makes Judaism such a hard sell. It's kind of like the parents that are divorced and dad has rules and mom doesn't, or vice versa. I want to go live at dad's house. Why? Because he lets me do what I want. Isn't that what kids say all the time? Mom is like, no, I have strict rules here. Or vice versa. Dad has strict rules, so they live with mom. Why? Because she has no rules, or very few. And so you see, that's what idolatry, the root of idolatry is I want to do what I want. And that's holding on to Paul. That's why Paul is such a big idol. That's why Jesus Christ is such a big idol. What? I thought you believed in the Messiah. I do. I believe in Yeshua, but Jesus Christ is an idol. It's a construct. It's a caricature. It's an idol. And why? Because remember, the idol doesn't, it just allows you to do what you want. You can take a pagan festival and make it okay if you want to. What do people say with me very often? They say to me, well, it's okay if you want to follow the kosher laws. There's nothing wrong with following God's law. What do you mean there's nothing wrong? There's nothing wrong with it? But you have to understand what they mean. They're coming to you from the heart of an idol worshiper. Do what you want. It's okay if you want to. It's okay if you don't want to. What does it say in Wiccan, the Wiccan cult? The Wiccan cult says, if it harm none, it's fine. That's what it says in Wiccan. As long as you harm, there's actually a phrase that they say, but basically it means you can do what you want as long as it doesn't harm anybody else. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the heart of idolatry. And that's the lesson we learn from Rachel and her idols. We have to turn away from that and follow the God of Israel only. You cannot mix Torah with idolatry. End of our Aliyah today. Shabbat Shalom to all of you. Thank you so much for being a part of this program all week. And thank you. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Not tomorrow. Yeah, we will tomorrow. What am I saying? Tomorrow is Shabbat. Yeah. Okay. What's today? Yeah. Tomorrow is Shabbat. We'll be back for the Gospel of Genesis series. And then we'll be back next week, Baruch HaShem, for continuation of our Aliyot. Until then, have a great and amazing Erev Shabbat, a wonderful prep day. Shabbat Shalom. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Be richly blessed.